Hi, this is Mark Gaylor, Adobe Photoshop Ambassador for the Asia Pacific region here, and we're going to discuss or feature my top 20 all-time favorite tips and techniques for when working in Photoshop CC. Okay, now we've arrived at tip number 6 in the series, and we're going to be looking at one of the important skills if you want to increase your creativity inside of a program such as Photoshop, and that is the ability to select various pixels. Now once we've selected pixels, we're able to create masks from those selections, or we can just edit the selected pixels and not the pixels that are not selected. So let's just start off with a basic selection tool to get this tip started. I'm going to select the rectangular marquee tool there, and I'm going to look at the options bar. We have an option to feather. Now I'm not going to actually feather this selection at this stage, so I'm just going to press 0 there. Okay, now if you do want to transition from an adjusted area to an unadjusted area, then typically you do want a small amount of feather. Alternatively, if we're creating a mask, we can add some Gaussian blur to that mask to soften that transition. But as this is particularly just looking at a selection, we're going to use that feather at 0 here. Now I'm just going to start on the top left hand corner. I'm going to select all of the pixels that are yellow in this selection. So I'm just going to select out right down to the bottom right hand corner. Now there's a couple of problems in that those yellow pixels are not absolutely running completely parallel to my selection that's working here. So the next part of the tip is just to select those pixels as they are, but then coming up to the select menu, we can choose transform selection. This allows me to modify the selected pixels. Now one of the best keys to add to your memory of keyboard shortcuts here is on a Mac is to hold down the command key. That would be the control key on the PC before we click on any of these bounding box handles. We can then click and drag just to make sure we've got absolute accuracy there. Now I could zoom in if I'm being very fussy here, but you can see that even though the original selection wasn't completely accurate, I do have the option now of making that selection absolutely align to the area that I want to select. I can now hit commit to commit that selection, and now I can go in and adjust those pixels. For example, let's just pick up hue saturation adjustment feature, and I'm going to adjust the hue not just of the selected pixels, but also particularly focus in on the yellow pixels there, and we'll just change the color of that to show you that I'm just affecting the selected pixels, but also the blues are protected because I've sort of targeted the yellows in this instance here. And you can see what has happened to that selection is actually created a mask on this adjustment layer. And that is very clever in that it helps me just fine tune the area of pixels that I want to work on. Okay, so that is the first aspect of the top tip for selections, is that we can use some quite simple tools but perfect that adjustment by transforming that selection. Okay, so let's move on to the next image where I'd like to look at selections. This time we're going to use an elliptical selection. So we'll just come over to that rectangular marquee and drop down to the elliptical marquee tool there. Now if I just want to select the eye, the central area of this eye, then question is where do I start making the selection? And if you start at the top, you're probably not going to be able to create an alignment with that eye. Okay, but if you hold down the space bar, you can actually float this selection around the screen, and so this would help me fine-tune the selection that I'm looking to create. Okay, and then just letting go of that mouse clicker will align that selection. There is another way. I'm just going to do Command D for deselect. That's Control D on a PC there. We can actually start, if you know where the rough center of the selection or elliptical selection you're trying to make is, you can hold down the Option key as you draw that, and it will draw it out from the center. Now again, I've missed the accuracy of where that center is, so I'm going to hold down the space bar as well as the Option key and float that elliptical selection into position there. So I've just got the center of the eye selected. Now I've got a little bit of the eyelid selected here, so I'm just going to remove that with the lasso tool with the subtract option there, which is the third one along, subtract. And so I'm just going to remove that top eyelid there, just drawing around very quickly to remove that from the selection. Now again, I could come in with something like hue saturation and just increase the saturation of that central area. So again, and you can see in the layer mask there that we're only affecting the pixels that are white in this layer mask. I'm just hiding this adjustment wherever we see the black portion of that adjustment layer mask there. Okay, so a couple of useful top tips for working with selections there. Obviously there are many more, but those are a couple of real basic ones to get you started with those selections. The last one really shows you that you can combine multiple selection tools in order to get to your most accurate selection. And usually what happens if you're working non-destructively, we're applying those adjustments to adjustment layers.